It was America's 100th birthday, but for the battered survivors camped along the Yellowstone River, there was nothing to celebrate. Just days earlier, the U.S. Army suffered one of its most shocking defeats, and one man lived to write about it. Lieutenant Charles A. Varnum's letter, written mere days after Custer's last stand, reveals the brutal, untold truth, a battlefield soaked in chaos, courage, and irreversible mistakes. But why wasn't this letter taught in school? What did Varnum see that history books leave out? And how close was the U.S. Army to avoiding this bloodbath altogether? This isn't just another retelling. It's the raw, unfiltered voice of a young officer who stood on the edge of annihilation and lived to tell the story no one else could. Stick around. The truth is far more haunting than the legend. It was supposed to be a moment of American triumph, July 4th, 1876, the nation's centennial. But on the banks of the Yellowstone River, there was no celebration, only silence, shock, and the stench of death. Just days earlier, an entire wing of the U.S. 7th Cavalry was wiped from the earth in a single afternoon. Their leader? One of the most iconic and controversial figures in American history, General George Armstrong Custer. And now, a surviving officer, Lieutenant Charles A. Varnum, had put pen to paper, revealing what really happened. But was the disaster a surprise ambush or a preventable massacre? Because what Varnum describes isn't a tale of noble last stands. It's a portrait of chaos, arrogance, and fatal misjudgment at the highest levels of command. The Army knew the native forces were massive. Custer was warned not to split his command. He did it anyway. He ignored intel from scouts. He dismissed reports of about 4,000 warriors gathering. And when Varnum, exhausted after a 36-hour ride, reported seeing the smoke of a huge village, Custer rushed into battle without waiting for reinforcements. So here's the question. Was this just a battle lost or a disaster orchestrated by ego, hubris, and ignorance? Because if Varnum is to be believed, the real story of Little Bighorn isn't about bravery. It's about a command that never should have happened. Stick around. The truth is more controversial and more human than the myth we've been sold. But before we proceed, take a moment. Let me know where you're watching from. And if this video is hitting you well, be sure to subscribe. Because tomorrow, I've got something lined up that's even more shocking, something you were never told in school. Lieutenant Charles Albert Varnum, a young and courageous cavalry officer, penned a heartfelt letter to his parents on July 4th, 1876, mere days after the infamous Battle of the Little Bighorn. Brimming with raw emotion and unvarnished truth, Varnum's account chronicles the harrowing conflict between the U.S. Army and the united forces of the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho. As one of the few surviving officers of the 7th Cavalry Regiment, his words offer an intimate and rare first-hand perspective on the chaos and bloodshed of that day, honoring the bravery of his fellow soldiers, acknowledging the tactical skill of their native opponents, and exposing the inner turmoil of a young man caught in the grip of war. July 4th, 1876, camp on the Yellowstone River. I'm writing you today, on Independence Day, from our camp along the Yellowstone. I have a chance to send a letter, so I want to share what's happened since I last wrote. On June 22nd, General Custer led the full regiment, around 605 men, alongside my detachment of 36 scouts, guides, and interpreters, up the Rosebud River in pursuit of Indian forces whose trail had been discovered by Major Reno. That first day we traveled about 12 miles, and the second, roughly 32 miles. Early the following morning, we came upon a heavily used trail leading further up the Rosebud. About 10 miles from where we had camped, we found a circular enclosure made from brush, a Sundance site meant to prepare warriors. A stick nearby bore a freshly taken scalp, and there were signs that a few Indians had passed by, probably that morning. After marching another 20 miles, I was sent back 6 miles to scout a creek for any signs that Indians had veered from the trail. Once I returned, we advanced another 8 miles and made camp at an Indian site that looked to be 2 days old. From the signs, we could tell the enemy force was large. We hoped to catch them off guard. Custer consulted with the scouts. The 6 Crow scouts, who were familiar with the terrain, believed the trail led toward the Little Horn, a fork of the Bighorn. They suggested moving about 20 miles to a high bluff for a better view of the valley. Custer needed a reliable white man to accompany them and relay their findings, so I went along with the 6 Crow scouts, 5 Reese, and an experienced frontiersman. We marched through the night for nearly 60 miles. By that point, I had been riding for 36 hours straight with no rest. General Custer intended to depart at 11 p.m. to link up with us by dawn. At 2:30 a.m., we reached the bluff and waited in the brush until sunrise. As daylight broke, we spotted smoke rising from what appeared to be an Indian village. At 5 a.m., I sent the Reese back with a message to Custer. The Crow scouts reported seeing between 2,000 and 3,000 ponies grazing on the plain about 12 miles off, though I couldn't see them myself. Custer's camp was about 8 miles from us, and he received the message around 8 a.m., quickly moving to rejoin us at the hill. As his column approached, 2 Sioux warriors emerged. Charlie Reynolds, the Crow interpreter, along with 2 Crow scouts and I, tried to intercept them to avoid alerting the village, but we failed. When Custer arrived, we briefed him, and realizing we had lost the element of surprise, he chose to hasten the attack. Around 2:30 p.m., we reached the vicinity of the village. Major Reno led companies A, G, and M into the fight. I watched from a distance with Lieutenant Hare. When our scouts scattered, I joined Captain Moylan and fought with Company A. We dismounted and engaged on foot near the village, but were soon overwhelmed. Surrounded and outnumbered, we withdrew first to the woods, then to a nearby bluff. The Indians pursued us only lightly. From our position, we heard fierce gunfire erupting from the far side of the village. Once we regrouped, we learned that Lieutenants McIntosh and DeRudio were unaccounted for, and Lieutenant Hodgson had been killed. Of Company G, only 5 men and Lieutenant Wallace survived. We had already lost over a third of our force. Just then, Colonel Benteen arrived with 3 companies, followed closely by the pack train and another company, bringing our total to about 300 men. We continued to hear intense gunfire from 2 miles away. It was clear that Custer's 5 companies were locked in a brutal battle beyond the village. We advanced along the bluff to try to reach him, but after a mile, we lost sight of his location and the sound of gunfire began to fade. With many wounded and the pack train slowing us down, we chose to hold our ground in a strong defensive position. The spot we selected was well defended, horses were kept in a hollow, and the area could only be attacked from one direction. Fierce fighting continued until around 9 p.m., when the firing ceased and did not resume until dawn. We reinforced our position as best we could. Throughout the next day, the Indians launched relentless attacks. Our casualties mounted rapidly. Yet in the midst of this horror, young soldiers transformed into battle-hardened veterans almost overnight, fighting amidst the dead and dying, surrounded by swarms of flies and filth, in a desperate struggle for survival. We had roughly 40 wounded men in a makeshift hospital. Mules and horses were used as a protective barrier, needing to be hit before bullets could reach the men. The conditions were beyond description. We had no water, and desperation set in. Volunteers were sent to retrieve water under intense fire. Many were wounded or killed. The horses suffered greatly as well, unable to drink or graze. The gunfire ceased on the afternoon of the 26th, and we observed the Indian village beginning to withdraw. After nightfall, we moved camp slightly to escape the stench of rotting animals. By morning, the Indians had vanished. Soon the reason became clear. General Terry had arrived with 5 companies of the 7th Infantry and 4 of the 2nd Cavalry. They had encountered our Crow scouts who had escaped and hurried to our aid, arriving around 10 a.m. and delivering the grim news. General Custer and his 5 companies had been completely wiped out. Nearly 300 men had perished, their bodies stripped and horribly mutilated. 16 officers had fallen: General Custer, Captain Keogh, Captain Yates, Captain Custer, Lieutenant Cook, First Lieutenant Smith, McIntosh, Calhoun, and Porter. Second Lieutenants Hodgson, Harrington, Sturgis, and Riley of the 7th Cavalry, Lieutenant Crittenden of the 20th Infantry, and Doctors Lord and D. Wolfe. Colonel Benteen and I each sustained 2 minor leg wounds while charging a hill to drive Indians away from our wounded. Looking back, the scale of loss is staggering. Mrs. Custer lost her husband and his 2 brothers, one of whom was a civilian traveling with us. Mrs. Calhoun lost her husband, 3 brothers, and her nephew, Mr. Reed, who was also with the column. Half our officers are gone, and the regiment is devastated. I'll share more in time. For now, I've been assigned command of what's left of Company I. This makes me a first lieutenant, now 11th in seniority. We are camped on the same ground where we fought on August 11th, 1873. A boat has been dispatched to Lincoln to contact General Sheridan for orders. Yesterday, we received mail from Fort Ellis, including a month-old letter from Sheridan warning General Terry not to split the command. He had reports that at least 5,000 warriors were assembling. I estimate we faced about 4,000. General Crook, with 16 companies of cavalry, was advancing from the south and had been reinforced by the entire 5th Cavalry, bringing his total to 28 companies, compared to our 12. This is a brief account of the situation. Please don't worry about me. Your affectionate son, Charles A. Varnum. The Battle of the Little Bighorn was not just a clash of armies. It was a collision of worlds. Through the eyes of Lieutenant Charles A. Varnum, we've retraced a journey from hope to horror, from the pride of a nation's centennial to a field strewn with the mutilated bodies of its fallen sons. His letter is more than a battlefield report. It's a reckoning. With each line, he forces us to confront the brutal cost of ambition, miscalculation, and myth-making. We often remember Custer as a tragic hero or a reckless fool. But what if the real story isn't about Custer at all? What if it's about the men who were ordered to follow him and the native warriors who fought not for conquest, but for survival? Why did we call it a massacre when white soldiers fell, but only a battle when thousands of native families were driven from their land? Why did history elevate Custer's name while erasing those who survived to tell the truth? Varnum's letter survives, not because it flatters, but because it dares to remember. And maybe, just maybe, that's the real reason it's been buried in the footnotes of history books. So, was Little Bighorn a military blunder, a cultural misjudgment, or something far darker, an American myth built on silence and sacrifice? You decide, and if you're brave enough, tell me in the comments. Should Custer be remembered as a martyr or a monument to everything we got wrong?